In 50th Street, German Shepherd mom brings her pups to a Marine's cabin. What happened next touched hearts. Leadville's night felt carved from glass. Wind sheared across timber, rattling nails, smearing the world white until even the pines looked like ghosts. The outside thermometer pinned to a crooked frame read -50. Inside a one-room cabin, Nathan Caleb Holt stood barefoot on cold planks, lean, 6'1", ex-Marine, shoulders tight against the howl. He kept the lamp low, stew untouched, rope coiled by the door, rifle oiled but not loaded. Solitude had become procedure, secure, assess, endure. He froze. Afghanistan, unspooled, a blown gate, a breath held too long, a friend whose dog warned first. Nathan counted 6 quiet inhales, slid the lamp wick down, and let darkness do its work. Another tap, smaller, followed by a thread-thin whimper that stitched itself through the wind and into his ribs. He tasted iron. Instinct said wait, something older said open. He nudged the stove shut, pocketed a matchbook, and eased toward the latch. The cabin listened with him, rafters creaking, frost ticking, stew skin settling, snow powdered through a seam around the threshold, glitter turning the floor into a field. A shadow pressed the door from outside, low and steady, refusing to collapse. In that outline, he recognized discipline, breath controlled, weight distributed, a mother bracing herself so others could live. Nathan's fingers found the iron. He thought of a wool blanket folded on a chair, his mother's, and a promise to protect whatever crossed his orbit on nights like this. He cracked the door, air knifed in, fur cold, smoke, fear, amber eyes and the faintest scent of milk. Beyond, tiny shapes trembled. Do not blink, winter remembers. Where are you reading from? Share your city below. What happened next will touch your heart. Leadville punished the careless, and tonight the valley felt intent on punishing everyone. Nathan Caleb Holt moved through his one-room cabin as if he still cleared doorways overseas, counting breaths, watching corners, trusting procedure over comfort. 6'1", lean from hikes and winters, he wore habits like scars. Ice blue eyes checked seams where cold slipped through. On the stove, elk stew rested beside jars sealed in November. A coil of rope hung by the door. A shovel leaned against the jamb, and a notebook sat on a crate table with a lamp, penknife, and compass. Boots dried on river stones. Split, stack, seal, label, store, endure. Afghanistan taught him the price of noise, weight, and hesitation. Dust turned noon to dusk, radios whispered before streets dissolved, and a shepherd dog barked once and saved 3 men. Shrapnel left a ridge along his shoulder that sang when pressure fell. After discharge, he chose distance and work that needed hands more than talk. Fences, cordwood, rabbits when shelves thinned. He paid cash, kept receipts in the notebook, and mailed holiday letters to families who deserved more than silence. Discipline starved panic. Rituals held for hours together. The cabin fit that life. The cot stood near the stove, blanket folded sharply at the foot. Frost ferns wrote a script on the window. Paracord hung from a peg. Mittens dangled above the heat. A tin of matches waited beside a candle stub, counted each Sunday because inventory steadied him. When loops from the past unspooled, he tidied until his pulse slowed. Memory arrived and left on its schedule. He refused to chase or bury it. Wind climbed the roof pitch and made rafters click. Snow powdered the sill and glittered on the boards near the threshold. He banked the fire, settled the stove door, and checked the latch because ritual steadied hands when weather tried to unmake language. Then a sound separated from the gale, too exact for branches. Claws tapped wood in an even rhythm. Stopped, then resumed, as if someone outside balanced inevitability with patience. Nathan stilled. The tapping did not plead, it announced duty. He did not romanticize wild neighbor. Hunger draws creatures toward heat, light, and mercy. Coyotes test hinges, cats ghost along the wall. Yet the cadence beyond the door suggested guardianship. He pinched the lamp's wick low and listened. A thin whimper rose, fragile as a string across dry wood. The procedure said wait. Conscience nudged. His gaze slid to the wool blanket folded on the chair, the one his mother mailed after his first winter here. A square that once smelled faintly of cedar. Thinking of her steadied him and bent the rule by a measurable inch. He set the rifle within reach but left the chamber empty. He slid the latch and cracked the door an inch. Air knifed inside and turned breath to glass. Snow spiraled across the floorboards. A figure leaned into the jam, motion steady, eyes level. Amber eyes met him. A German shepherd stood braced against the gust, coat crusted with frost, body angled to shield a cluster pressed tight along her chest. 4 pups trembled in the drift, small flanks pumping, paws lifting in alternating misery. One tried to climb and failed, then tried again. The mother did not plead. She held the line the way a sentry holds a door. Nathan opened wider, and let the storm speak around them. Wind throbbed, iron ticked, claws scraped, breath rasped. He knelt, palm turned down, voice. The shepherd spared his hand a quick test, then returned her attention to the pile. He lifted the nearest pup, tucked it under his sweater, then another, lighter and colder, still stubborn enough to nip his glove. He slid both into a crate near the stove, lining it with an old flannel A third pup snagged his cuff with needle claws. He freed the fabric gently and set the small body beside its siblings. The fourth shook as if made of bees. He cupped it until the vibration eased, then lowered it into the net. The mother guarded the edge with composed calculation, nose sweeping the rim, ears swiveling. Snow fell from her shoulders in clumps that steamed as heat took hold. Nathan closed the door and felt the latch see. Cold still ruled the corners, yet the room began its slow conversion from survival to shelter. He built the fire higher, added a split log, then set water to warm. From a cupboard he fetched honey, not as sweetness but as a field trick learned from a medic who swore by it. A drop touched to each tongue, wait for swallowing, repeat, patience over hurry. He softened the stew with hot water in a tin and slid it near the threshold. The mother ate in measured bursts, pausing to check the crate between mouthfuls. Urgency deferred to duty, and he recognized the ethic because it lived in him too. The cabin's smell changed, spruce smoke, wet fur, iron, thawing leather. Heat pooled near the stove and moved outward in slow circles. Frost receded a fraction, revealing pines bowed under snow. The pups twitched as warmth reached bellies, muzzles nudging, feet flexing in dreams that did not yet include fields. Nathan rubbed the wool blanket, then draped it across the crate's rim to keep warmth in and drafts out. He spoke evenly, narrating each action, warming, feeding, watching, guard. Breaking the door rule rearranged his ledger. Solitude had preserved him. Tonight responsibility expanded the room without moving a wall. Outside the storm worked to erase tracks. Inside, breath condensed, then clear. He checked paws for ice, toes for cracks, bellies for cold shock, and ears for frostbite. He rotated the crate away from the seam. He folded spare mittens as a bolster under the smallest neck. He topped the kettle and set a second tin near the fire, so food could warm quiet. He listened for anything beyond the weather and heard only wind grinding the ridge. The mother lay with front paws tucked, head lifted, attention unbroken. When a tiny squeak rose, she eased closer, touched noses and returned to watch. Nathan moved the rope closer, set the shovel upright, and pinched the lamp wick clean. Action replaced dread. The storm remained terrible, but purpose carried heat where fear could not. He sat on the floorboards and let the stove bridge the space between his knees and the crate. He thought about letters he never sent, names he spoke only in his head, and the K9 whose handler never made it back. Obedience can look like love when it chooses protection over panic. The mother's chest rose and fell with steady calm. He set a schedule, check every 10 minutes until paws warmed through, a touch of honey every hour, water on the half hour, food on the hour, and the crate turned when the draft shifted. He let the mother set boundaries and met them. He kept the fire steady and held the room between frost and sweat. Outside, darkness pressed its face to the glass. Inside, heat gathered like an argument against despair. He chose to stand watch until dawn tonight. Have you ever faced a moment where trust changed everything? Reflect quietly. Dawn arrived like a rumor rather than a sunrise, a graying of storm light that softened the cabin without lifting the cold. Nathan kept the fire alive and watched steam feather from the kettle while 4 small bodies shifted under the wool blanket that once rode his mother's lap during radio nights. He had draped it across the crate and tucked the corners so heat pooled. A spare mitten served as a neck rest where the weakest pup breathed in shallow, unreliable pulls. The German shepherd mother lay a pace away, angled toward the crate, eyes level, muscles taut beneath frost that still clung in brittle plates. Her amber gaze hovered over every motion he made, not pleading, not threatening, simply taking measure. He warmed water in a dented tin, added a cautious drizzle of honey, and tested the temperature on his wrist. Spruce smoke and damp fur thickened the air. He lifted the blanket edge, felt the hoarded warmth, then cupped a tiny muzzle and tipped a drop between dry lips. Swallow. Another. Pause. Swallow. He repeated the slow pattern, breathing metronomed to the rhythm until the pup's tongue remembered its job and nudged the spoon. The mother's ears tipped forward, flattened, then settled again into a steady guard, agreement by increment. He moved to the next pup and did the same, hands steady from years of drills that taught muscle to hold when the mind wanted to rush. The third answered with a faint growl, testing strength, and he smiled without showing teeth. The fourth slept like cooled ash, barely moving, so he slipped 2 fingers under its ribs and counted the pulse. There it was, thin but persistent. He set the kettle closer, angled the crate away from the seam where a thread of wind crept under the sill, and rubbed warmth into tiny paws until pads softened against his palm. Boot steps approached through the snow that had drifted halfway up the door. He heard them before he saw their maker, the tread careful and unhurried. 3 soft knocks followed, the kind people use when they respect how sound travels in winter. Nathan glanced at the shepherd, her gaze held steady, suspicion without panic. He eased the latch and opened just enough to admit a figure wrapped in a slate coat, scarf pulled high, eyes bright with prairie clarity. He trusted. "Morning, Nathan," Clara Wren said, voice muted by the cold. A widow in her 40s with the stance of someone who has negotiated hard winters, she lived 5 miles down the old mining road and preferred solutions over speeches. Snow dusted her shoulders, she held a jar in a mittened hand. "Brought the good stuff, clover honey. It sticks even when appetite refuses." He stepped aside. Clara crossed to the crate, dipped her head to the mother, and waited. The shepherd sniffed her glove, then returned to watching Nathan. Permission arrived by degree. Clara warmed a teaspoon above the stove and let a slender spiral fall onto her thumb. "You want sugar, not heat," she murmured. "Miners used to say, this teaches bodies to remember." She offered the taste to the weakest mouth. A flicker, then another. The pup laughed. Clara's smile was small and satisfied, the smile of someone who values results more than praise. Nathan's shoulders loosened. Clara set the jar near the kettle and assessed the pups with brisk tenderness. "They'll make it if the day stops testing them," she said. "That blanket's perfect. Your mother had good sense." He nodded. He did not say how long it had been since he heard his mother's voice or how this fabric still carried a portion of her steadiness across years. Amber eyes tracked Clara's hands now and again, auditing technique as if the mother kept a ledger. The dog's restraint felt like a contract: "You do your work and I will do mine." Nathan fed the fire and slid a lid upright as a baffle so sudden pops would not startle anyone. Clara pulled a folded square from her coat, a flour sack she had hemmed into a liner, and tucked it beneath the blanket to wick away dampness. She glanced at the smallest. "Tough pebble," she said. "That one will talk first." Outside, wind surrendered its roar and settled into the scrape of gusts rearranging drifts around pines. Nathan cracked the window and scanned the slope, a line of trees cut black against new light. Something paused where branches should sway but didn't. He closed the window and checked the latch again. Clara saw the glance and did not waste time with questions. "Plenty of hungry men on the ridge," she said. "Not all of them see dogs as companions." He nodded. Poachers favored shoulder seasons, but hunger ignored calendars, and a mother with pups makes a tempting story for the wrong sort. He moved the rope coil under the bench, kept the shovel where a hand could find it, and palmed the penknife. The shepherd tracked the shift and tightened her paws on the plank floor. "Easy," he said. "We see it, we're not inviting it." Clara poured an inch of warm water into a shallow dish and placed it near the crate so steam drifted beneath the blanket without wetting fur. "You did right," she said. "Rules get us through until Mercy tells us which ones to bend." She pulled a small bottle from her pocket and tapped 2 drops of resinous tincture into the honey, the kind of quiet trick learned after years of field fixing. They worked in concert, a choreography that needed few words. Check pause, rotate the nest, warm the spoon, confirm swallow, rest. The room's temperature rose a humane amount. Frost thinned on the lamp glass, receded at the window's edge, drew back like a tide. The mother lowered her head and exhaled a long breath that sounded half like relief, half like vigilance. catching a second wind. Nathan recognized it. Stand down without relaxing. He had lived inside that discipline for years. Clara repacked her bag. You eating? She asked. He ladled stew, handed her a bowl, and took his place on the floor beside the crate, so their heat added to the small system of care they had built. The smallest spat a thread of blanket fiber, sneezed and rooted deeper as if embarrassed to be seen trying. Clara laughed once, a clear, quick sound that left no sharp edges. Spring will make a rascal out of that one. He could also see the far tray line that refused to move like wind, the metallic wink where frost might show on a barrel, and the decision he would have to make if the figure hardened into more than weather. The shepherd ignored the window and kept her gaze on living heat within reach, a lesson about priorities he admired in creatures that love without words. He rolled the blanket edge to let in fresh air and checked bellies again. Warm, not hot, paws returning color, tongues. He counted heartbeats, lost track, counted again, then stopped and listened to the collective rhythm instead. A handler's name rose and sank. He steadied his breathing and touched the crate's rim. Think of a time a stranger's kindness surprised you. Hold that memory close. Snow lightened until the world looked like paper folded into mountains. A crow called once, then again, as if taking inventory on behalf of the cold. Nathan tilted water into the mother's dish and watched her drink without greed. She finished, licked each pup, and resumed her pup. He admired her restraint precisely because it carried teeth. Duty with choices, a code without rank. Clara buttoned her coat and tucked the honey away. I'll loop back by the aspen cut, she said, so nobody measures my steps to your door. If I pass tracks that look wrong, you'll hear me. If I don't return by dusk, assume I'm warm and bored. It was an old joke between people who respected danger by refusing to decorate it. He thanked her without ornament. She tapped his sleeve once, like a captain signing off a clean watch, and stepped into the brightness. He stood after the latch settled, listening for her tread as it faded into the wind and distance. The figure among trees did not show again, or learned patience from the weather and waited harder. He placed a chair across from the crate and sat where the mother could see his hands at every moment. She blinked once, slowly, and matched her breathing to the rhythm the pups had found. Nathan lifted the kettle, poured a fresh measure, and prepared the next cycle. Trust arrived like warmth, not all at once, not evenly, yet undeniable. It pooled in corners, soaked the blanket's weave, and rose from bodies that had decided to live. He felt it in the way the mother's eyes softened without losing their edge, in the way the smallest pushed its nose through the fold to seek his wrist, in the way the storm's voice receded until silence sounded like shelter. He felt it most in the decision to keep the door unbarred while daylight built its pale room around the cabin. Outside, frost brightened the pines until they glittered like glass. Inside, fire ticked, water hummed, and the blanket held. Nathan checked the window once more, then let the curtain fall. He set another log, strung a line above the stove for drying gear, and wrote a timing chart in his notebook because order makes kindness sustainable. The mother watched the pencil, then the spoon, then the blanket, trusting the sequence. He nodded back, a soldier's salute, given without ceremony. The slope steadied under a lid of hard light. A faint silhouette hovered beyond the far spruce, then folded into stillness again. He considered tracks, angles, and the noise a single alert would make in thin air. He did not chamber around. He lowered the bar instead, placed the rifle within reach, and chose to speak to the room rather than the threat beyond it. We're fine for now, he said. Eat, rest, grow. The mother answered with a soft chuff that sounded like agreement. He cleaned the spoon, rewarmed the honey, and repeated the cycle from the beginning. Swallow, pause, breathe. Swallow. He rubbed paws between his palms until pads softened and curled against his skin without flinching. He lifted each tail and checked for frostbite, then folded the blanket's edge to build a low wall against drafts. He tracked minutes with the same attention he once gave to radio check times. Structure made hope feel responsible rather than reckless. A chip of ice ticked the wind. He looked up in time to catch motion flit between two trunks and vanish. Whoever stood out there understood weather and patience. He clicked the lamp higher by a notch and reeled the curtain closed so silhouettes would not paint target. The room resumed its humble music, fire, kettle, breath, the faint scratch of tiny nails as sleep loosened its grip. Clara's steps returned briefly on the ridge, a distant crunch that bent north toward the aspen. He pictured her walking with poles through snow laced like salt over slate, scanning for the slick geometry of snare wire, or the glint of a cheap scope. She would leave notes at the trailhead if patterns looked wrong, and he would read them at dusk with a steady hand. The pups stirred again. The smallest nosed through the blanket and found his wrist. He didn't move until the search ended, and a sigh lifted against his skin. The mother's amber eyes met his, and held, weighing him with a quiet that felt like acceptance earned one act at a time. Outside the day kept its distance. Inside the work continued, somber yet hopeful, measured and kind, a discipline that felt like grace made practical. He breathed slowly and kept watch. Night lowered over Leadville and turned the valley into a lidded bowl. Wind lost its scream and settled into a rasp that combed high spruce. Nathan kept a steady glow in the stove while 4 small bodies breathed under his mother's wool. The German Shepherd mother rose, shook Frost and met his gaze with calm command. "Hold the room, I will earn the food." He eased the latch, opened a hand's width and let the door kiss shut so heat would not leak. Snow hissed once, then stilled. Beyond the eaves the creek wore iron and moonlight seeped through the clouds. He listened until her footfalls faded, then returned to the crate. The weakest lay like a cooled ember, warmer than before, not yet sending sparks. He slipped 2 fingers beneath tiny ribs, matched the beat to his pulse, and found stubborn life. He warmed water, drizzled honey and tested it on his wrist. Steam softened the blanket fringe. He lifted an edge, built a nest from folded mittens, and guided a drop across a dry tongue. Swallow, pause, breathe. Another swallow arrived like a remembered skill. The other 3 nosed together, small flanks rising in a rhythm that steadied the room. Clara's chair waited by the door, empty and eloquent. He pictured her lamp, moving through the aspen cut, poles reading crust, eyes catching wire glint where it had no right to shine. He trusted her judgment, he trusted his own hands here. Duty divided the night, they accepted assignments. The storm's voice thinned, snow whispered along the ridge, and forgot how to hammer. He cracked the window, tasted iron and pine, then shut it before drafts nipped the crate. Outside for wood, he found cold biting less than an hour earlier. Tracks led away from the stoop, her stride direct and efficient. He tapped ice from logs and set them safe. Minutes stretched, the kettle murmured. Frost retreated from the pane. When the latch trembled, he was already there. He opened to a slit. She slid in with a low chuff, breath pluming, muzzle darkened by work. She set a rabbit on the mat, turned and vanished again. He closed the door, wiped snow from the fur and went to the board. Respect keeps morale alive during long watches, so he thanked her aloud. Knife work came clean and quick. Waste minimized, sinew for ties, bones for stock. Put meat into a pan at the stove's rim, low heat and water, coaxing warmth, into something small stomachs could accept. The latch quivered again. She returned, dragging a second rabbit, shoulders lifted against effort, eyes steady, only do. He barred the door, and knelt where she could see his hands. She settled near the crate, angled to audit every motion, and the window. He portioned bites no bigger than a thumbnail, touched each to his wrist, then offered them one by one. The strongest mouthed with greedy surprise. The third needed 2 tries before swallow arrived. The smallest waited until scent reached whatever stubborn district still held the line. Tongue grazed his thumb, then latched. He counted to 10 before offering more. Heat spread. Scents changed. Spruce smoke mellowed. Iron faded. Rabbit yielded to broth. Frost turned to water, snow sighed from the eaves, paws twitched under wool. The mother watched without intruding, discipline mirroring his own. She had bled calories into darkness for others. He honored that sacrifice with order, not panic. Clara's absence kept speaking. He imagined her scanning the tree line where he had noticed a motionless shape at dusk. Poachers favor shoulder seasons, hunger ignores calendar. He set the shovel within reach, kept the rifle oiled with the chamber empty, and left the bar ready. A shadow that stays still can be patience or mercy. Prepare for both. He saved bones for broth, knotted sinew, slid trimmings outside for honest scavengers, and returned to the cycle. The shepherd ate last after nosing each face, and taking attendance with quick breaths. He placed a modest portion by the threshold so she could guard and eat at once. 3 bites, a drink, then her post. No appetite for comfort before coverage. He knew that creed and order followed action. He cleaned the knife, washed the pan, coiled twine and wrote in the notebook. 2 rabbits, all fed. Smallest answered, wind easing, Clara scouting. Records keep fear from inventing story. He slipped the pencil under its loop, and sat beside the crate while the kettle tapped a metronome. The smallest stirred as if a bell rung far away, had finally reached town. A paw opened against his palm, a sigh found his skin and stayed. He fed another thin morsel, waited, then offered water with a fingertip trail to encourage pursuit. The mouth followed. Firelight put a soft coin in the mother's eyes. She blinked once, a soldier's nod. He rose, shoulder twinging where shrapnel left a He rotated the crate, propped a rolled shirt as a windbreak, and checked each ear. The cabin smelled of wood, wet fur, broth, and faint sweetness. Warmth pooled under rafters and sank as a weather system they built together. Outside, the dark learned to stand still. Inside, breath answered. He cracked the door and listened. The ridge spoke in softened syllables, powder settling, a limb shedding load, creek muttering under a lid. The tree line did not move in ways that meant people. He dropped the bar, and returned to the cycle. Feed, wait, water. Bellies rounded modestly, paws flexed, dreams replaced shivers. The blanket held. His mother's sacrifice served 2 women, hers and the hunter, who let cold cut her so others could live. When he ladled broth to cool, he recited a patrol cadence, steady pace, clear rotes, shared burdens, no heroics beyond necessary ones. The shepherd's choices preached the same sermon without speech. Leave warmth, find food, return, She had carried risk into a world that erases small lives. Men he loved did the same. Graves remembers quiet duty better than loud stories. The stove's pulse matched a sleeping animal. He let his muscles step down from alert without abandoning readiness. He nodded toward the mother. Good work. She chuffed once. He settled into the long watch. Each quarter hour, he checked paws, turned the crate, offered the smallest a thread of nourishment, and warmed fingers at the iron door. Time became a river rather than a cliff. False dawn waited behind the clouds. The kettle murmured. He fed the fire, checked the bar, and breathed with the room until his chest matched its rhythm. Then he spoke to the air, not prayer or contract, more like a brief to himself. Keep them warm, keep them fed, keep them safe. When has someone's sacrifice inspired you to act? Pause and consider. The smallest latch again, stronger than before. The others sprawled with satisfaction. The shepherd's eyes softened. The storm's roar passed, leaving a hush that felt earned. In that hush, duty did not feel like a weight. It felt like belonging. Nathan held the room the way a Marine holds a line, quietly, completely, with faith that dawn would find them because they chose to carry one another through the longest hour. By late morning the storm had softened into a gray hush that silvered the pines and let the creek sound like a muted bell. Nathan kept the stove steady, turned the crate toward the heat, and checked each small belly with 2 fingers, searching for steady warmth rather than fever. The German shepherd mother lay by the door, forepaws folded, head lifted, amber eyes moving in a calm patrol between latch, window and the wool blanket that once rode his own mother's knees. The weakest pup, the stubborn pebble that had fought hardest through the night, managed a slow stretch and a wider breath. Nathan noted the change, closed the blanket a finger's width, and breathed with the room. A thin sound threaded the quiet, so slight he could have mistaken it for a nail ticking as wood adjusted. It came again, thinner, then broke into 2 notes. He looked at the mother, her ears tipped forward, then steadied. He moved to the door, palm finding iron cold enough to bite. When he cracked the latch, snow light spilled across the planks, and the sound sharpened into truth. 2 tiny shapes stood beyond the threshold, not hers by scent or carriage, one soot-backed and quivering so hard its teeth clicked, one pale beneath grime, ribs showing like drawn lines. They took 1 step, failed, took another, and gave up the rest to whatever lived in their small hearts. The shepherd did not bristle, She rose, circled with the professional focus of a sentry, checked bellies, ears and feet, then touched Nathan's shin with a deliberate nudge. Accept, assist, protect. He read the order as clearly as any hand signal in dust. He lifted the soot-backed scrap and tucked it under his sweater so skin could lend what fire could not. He gathered the pale newcomer and felt tremors climb his forearms like electrical chatter. He closed the door, set the bar and built heat without hurry. Urgency hurries mistakes, discipline keeps life. He draped a clean cloth over a warmed skillet and set both newcomers upon it, then tented the blanket into a low cave that trapped steam. Honey ribboned into warm water, turning medicine bright as amber. He checked paw pads for ice, cleared toes and rubbed small ribs in slow circles that taught lungs how to remember air. The soot-backed pup coughed, blinked hard and pushed its face into the cloth as if tunneling toward a former life. The pale one lay too still. He touched the spoon to his wrist, then to its mouth. A bead trembled, slid, vanished. Another followed. A thread of swallow answered with a tiny push of the tongue, stubborn and good. The mother watched the sequence without inserting herself, discipline in muscle and patience in breath. When the soot-backed scrap coughed again, she cleared its face with quick licks, then resumed her audit of Nathan's hands. He made the crate larger with a rolled shirt wall so the original 4 would not crush the newcomers in their sleep. The smallest of the first litter lifted its head, blinked and settled, as if the room itself had explained the change without ceremony. The newcomers answered with faint squeaks and then used everything they had to stay present. He warmed broth, teased rabbit meat into silk threads and dipped each strand until it held heat without harm. With the patience learned fixing radios and cleaning field wounds, he placed thin morsels against the newcomers' tongues and waited while instinct woke. The soot-backed one learned first, paws flexing against his thumb with a tiny insistence that felt like permission to hope. The pale one startled at taste, then worked with a seriousness older than its body. He kept his voice even for the mother's sake, narrating each move, not to soothe but to confirm the plan they now shared. Outside the storm lay down like a tired animal. Snow slid from the roof in soft sheets and dropped to the yard with muffled thumps. Yet the ridge refused to relax. When he lifted the curtain a finger's width, the line of trees held too still, and between two trunks, a narrow shape wore the kind of patience people practice when they want what belongs to others. He let the curtain fall. The room deserved attention more than the shadows did. He moved the rope coil closer, set the shovel within reach, and kept the rifle across 2 pegs with the chamber empty. The world outside might test them, the world inside required gentleness with accuracy. He wrote a line in the notebook, 2 orphans arrived, not hers, accepted after inspection and nudge, then added markings and estimated weight so memory would not carry everything alone. He refilled the kettle and tasted the air, spruce smoke, damp fur, faint honey, a trace of broth. The cabin smelled like work that mattered. The smallest of the original 4 attempted the new wall, slid backward, and tried again. Nathan slipped a mitten under tiny haunches and let determination find foot. The soot-backed newcomer tucked its nose beneath the blanket edge and pushed until it reached warmth. The pale one lifted its head without help and aimed its mouth toward the spoon with a clear request. He answered with care measured in drop. The mother rested her shoulder against his boot for a breath, then returned to the door, listening as if she could measure distance by the shape of silence. Clara did not return by noon. Her chair near the threshold looked like a promise waiting for its moment. Nathan pictured her walking the aspen cut with poles, reading crust for quiet traps and the sly shine of wire. He boiled bones and poured thin stock into lids that served as dishes for bodies not ready for bowls. The pale newcomer planted both paws while drinking, as if staking a claim on this future. The soot-backed one hiccuped fiercely and fell asleep with a thread of blanket, caught between small teeth, victory claimed and forgotten. He and the mother worked without urgency and without a break. He rotated the crate so drafts could not find the youngest spines. She counted noses after each feed and licked faces with quick audits, then checked the window again. Trust did not mean inattention, it meant shared vigilance. He admired that unspoken contract because he had lived by its code for years and knew its cost. He checked the ridge again. Emptiness hid more than it revealed. A raven crossed, carving the sky with a voice made of iron filings and scorn. Sun found a brief gap and poured silver across the far slope. Inside heat seeped into pine boards, lifted resin from knots, and loosened the ache in his shoulder, until memory retreated from a shout to a low conversation. He wrote another line, expanding family. He did not underline it, the room already had. He cleaned the spoon, set fresh water, and sat with his spine against the cot frame so he could see both door and crate without moving. He watched for signs that meant failure, gums paling, paws stiffening, tongues refusing, and saw nothing. He watched for signs that meant strength, ears rising at sound, heads turning toward warmth, tails guessing at joy, and saw both. He breathed in a way that made space for ghosts without letting them take the table. Dusk rehearsed itself on the ridge. The cabin answered with a glow that belonged to working systems rather than decoration. The original four sprawled into a drowsy constellation. The two newcomers lay within that shape, not at the edge, not at the center, exactly where a wise captain would place recruits with will but thin reserve. The mother settled so her body made a windbreak without stealing heat. Nathan lowered the blanket a fraction and let the softness become a roof. A distant crunch moved along the slope, faint and wrong for settling snow. He did not stand. He listened until the sound faded, then checked the bar with two slow fingers. He spoke to life rather than to fear. Another spoon for the pale one, a touch of honey for the soot-backed fighter, a fresh log set gently so the flame would widen its circle. Recall a moment you welcomed someone unexpected into your life. What did it teach you? Night gathered outside and pressed its face to the glass. Inside, air held the bright purity of spruce smoke and the small music of breath. The newcomers slept with mouths open as if still tasting the world they had chosen. The mother lifted her head and met his eyes. Amber held him steady, clear and unsentimental, measuring him with the same standard she used on herself. He nodded back. Whatever waited between the trees could wait. The room had a larger task and he was grateful to be ordered by that. He wrote one final line: 6 accounted for, feeds regular, heat steady, watch shared, and laid the pencil down. The kettle sighed, the stove the cabin kept time with heartbeats he could count if required, but he did not. He let the rhythm carry him. Outside, patience learned the cost of cold. Inside, warmth held, trust grew, and a family that had not existed at dawn settled into night with the simple authority of survival done well and repeated. He kept watch while trust widened the room. Dusk gathered without color, sanding edges off the trees until the ridge looked carved from ash. Nathan checked the stove draft, set a split on coals, and studied the door while the German shepherd mother lay pressed to the threshold, chest low, ears forward, listening with a patient soldier's understand. 6 pups breathed under the wool, the 2 newest folded into the litter, as if the day had always belonged to them. The wind, bored with its tantrum, rubbed the eaves like a file. Frost released the window's edge one bead at a time. He boxed the next feeding in his notebook because order steadies rooms that tempt fear. 3 raps touched the door, too neat for branches, too light for a friend. The mother rose without a sound. Her growl settled into a line of warning that filled the planks more honestly than any word. Nathan breathed once, stepped to the peg where the rifle rested, confirmed the chamber was empty, and let his hand fall to the latch without finishing the motion. Evening, he said, name and reason. A man answered with winter on his breath. Cold and lost, he said. Road vanished. Need heat. The voice was thin and practiced, a wire pulled tight across politeness. Nathan pictured angles, boots from the cut, a gaze, searching for prizes. He eased the bar enough to crack the door. Snow light slid in and stroked the floorboard. A lean figure stood outside, face paired by weather and want, eyes sharp in a way that counted living things before counting anything else. Bad night to wander, Nathan said. Bad week, the stranger answered. You're keeping extra. His attention fell to the dog and stayed there. The mother lifted her head higher, amber fixed on the man's hands, then the pack slung high on his shoulder. Nathan read that gaze, and put his body where it needed to be, between hunger and what hunger desired. Cabin's full, Nathan said. Storm's moving off. Follow the creek a mile and you'll hit a ranger hut. The man smiled without warmth. I know every hut. I know every dog is worth money, he said, letting threat bleed along the edges. Heard. Nathan kept his face plain, the way he looked at checkpoints where one glance could give away a convoy. Coyotes sing after a blow, he said. The world is noisy. Noise like that. The stranger leaned, eyes cutting past Nathan's shoulder. Looks domestic sells quickly when the teeth are right. The mother's growl deepened. Her stance shifted forward, weight balanced, claws silent against wood. Nathan felt his own body mirror that posture without choosing. A pup squeaked in sleep. The man caught the sound and sharpened. "Let me warm up, then I'll move on," he said, altering tone to something neighborly and false. "Trade you jerky for coffee, maybe look at what you're sheltering, could help you manage numbers. You'll move on now," Nathan said. "Water's yours, nothing else." He passed a dented bottle through the gap. The man took it, eyes never leaving the mother. He drank, wiped his glove and leaned as if to win an inch more door. Boot steps approached from the slope, quick and sure. Clara Wren's knock sounded a beat later, 3 soft taps near the hinge where force cannot argue. Nathan widened the door only enough for her to slip in sideways. She lifted her scarf and took in the scene with one sweep. Dog braced, rifle near, stranger set to bolt. "Evening," she said, voice flat as a lid. "You need something you can name." The man's look slid to Clara, and measured possibilities again. She carried poles and calm, which in these hills means experience. "Heat," he said. "Only heat." His gaze returned to the shepherd. "Good bitch," he added, a verdict flavored with profit. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Heat they earned," she said. "Roads open below the bend. The ranger hut never locks. You'll make it." The stranger let the bottle "I'll come back when frost quits biting," he said, too mild to be harmless. "Dogs fetch higher when spring starts barking." "Don't," Clara said. "Won't," Nathan added, and shut the door to the width of the bottle's neck. The man stared through the seam as if he could will it wider, then tipped the water back into the room, a petty gesture that landed cold across the boards and turned away. His steps ran thin along the slope, then stopped, then resumed farther off, as if he had chosen a line that keeps sightlines long. Nathan set the bar with the quiet he demanded from his own hands. The mother kept her station, readiness intact, ears cutting the world into signals. Clara unrolled a strip of cloth and wiped the spill. "Saw his tracks at the cut," she said. "Snare wire near the aspen. He set 3. I sprang 2. The last broke, hungry and bored. He'll try for daylight," Nathan said. "Or for a window when lamps rise." "Both," Clara said. She glanced toward the crate, not long enough to paint a target, long enough to confirm warmth. "How are our rascals?" "Fed. Improving," Nathan said. 2 new orphans. Mother accepted them. "Figures," Clara said. "Duty recognizes key." She settled against the door frame and let the poles rest across her knees like quiet weapons. They waited without speech. Nathan kept his body at a low idle, eyes moving, ears ready. The mother mirrored him. Clara scanned the sill, then the window seam, then the stove, looping suspicion until it slowed. The pups breathed on. The smallest nosed through the blanket and found a fold. Nathan did not reward the motion with attention. He rewarded it with steadier. Boot steps ghosted the yard again, closer to the window than the door. A shadow crossed the curtain seam. Nathan placed 2 fingers on the rifle without lifting. Clara's hand found a pole grip. The mother's lip rose just enough to define boundaries. The shape paused, measured, and moved on. Silence followed, purposeful rather than empty. "That promise," Clara said quietly. "He meant it." "I know," Nathan said. "Promises like that are maps." She tightened her scarf. "I'll circle to the bend, make sure the hut invites." She touched his sleeve. "Anchor the room." He slid the bolt after she left, and listened until her steps became ridge noise. He returned to the cycle that keeps fear from spilling. Feed, water, rotate, he wrote, "Stranger, lean, eyes wrong, promised return," then closed the notebook because names on paper can conjure people. The mother stepped until her shoulder touched his boot. Her eyes held him like a hand would hold a wrist, firm enough to confirm pulse, gentle enough to grant movement. He rested his palm along her neck, and felt sinew undercoat, a livelihood built on vigilance rather than ease. "We hold," he said. She breathed once. Outside, darkness rebuilt its quiet empire. Inside, firelight gilded plank scars, and tossed a soft coin into the shepherd's gate. The smallest pup squeaked, found siblings and slept without noticing courage. Nathan turned the wool so no draft could get in, keeping it warm. "Have you ever sensed danger but stood firm? Reflect on your strength." When the night settled into one voice, Nathan took the second watch. If the stranger returned, he would meet a room anchored by shared duty, a sentinel mother, whose growl translated his instincts, a neighbor whose presence turned threat into plan, and a Marine who understood that mercy and resolve can share a door without letting it swing. The ridge could keep its patience. The cabin had enough of its own. We held steady. Morning pared the storm down to a hush that seemed borrowed. The ridge kept its gray distance while the creek murmured under loosening ice. Nathan fed the stove and lifted the wool blanket's edge so light could meet heat. 6 pups shifted as one living quilt, the 2 orphans tucked among the original 4 as if the room had redrawn its map overnight. The German shepherd mother rose from her post near the door, stretched and chose the hearth ribs toward warmth, muzzle toward the latch, permission and patrol in a single line. Clara arrived near noon with snow stitched to her scarf and a basket warm enough to scent the air before the latch fell. "No fresh wire on the cut," she said. "Tin tags are hanging. If anything brushes them, they'll sing." She crouched with the patience of someone who respects teeth and duty. Amber eyes assessed glove, breadth and distance, then allowed a handspan. Clara set the basket by the kettle, steam braided with spruce smoke, bread and rabbit widening the room's idea of itself. The pups tested their wobbly legs with the arrogant courage of the newly spared. One pounced on a fold and somersaulted backward, astonished that gravity kept its promises. The soot-backed orphan gnawed a loose thread as if memorizing a rule. The pale one chased a sliver of sun across the boards and sneezed when dust rose to greet ambition. Nails stitched tiny sounds along the blanket's edge, then quieted as sleep rolled back over them like a tide. The mother tolerated the storm for a minute, then tidied with efficient nudges and a single chuff that asked for order without stealing joy. Nathan moved in patterns that felt like prayer disguised as logistics. Feeds staggered, water warmed, never paws dried with a cloth heated above the stove so blood could return without complaint. He wrote times and amounts in the notebook because paper insists on clarity when memory wants to wander. Clara took the door and watched the slow. "He follows lines other people lay," she said, meaning the lean stranger from yesterday. "If he returns, he'll try the easy path and hope we forget we drew it." Nathan left the curtain 2 fingers open to measure the world without advertising his gaze. After the dishes, he brought a small tin from his pack, resin welded along the seam. The penknife pried gently until the lid relented and leather the color of dust folded into his palm, a brass tag dulled by years. He held the collar like a last photograph, careful with edges that can still cut. Coda, the letters read, shallow from a handler who pressed hard in a hurry. Heat woke scent from the strap, oil, weather and a working life that once found danger by standing perfectly still. Clara saw and looked away to grant the moment its size. The mother rose, crossed and scented the leather with patient curiosity. Reading history the way dogs do, nose finding the paragraph no human could translate. Her eyes lifted to Nathan's and held. He turned the strap and found the stretched hole a tooth had worn during a long wet. Sand erasing boot prints. A handler buried far from trees, a unit learning to breathe without counting the missing at every inhale. The collar wanted to be a tool again, not a relic, a promise worn rather than stored. The afternoon soft. The hard light became a pale wash that found the lamp base, the crate's rim, and the tiny nails that keep boards honest. The room glowed the way safe rooms glow, not bright, simply The soot-backed orphan tried the rolled shirt wall, slid into Nathan's sleeve with theatrical outrage, and marched across his palm as if filing a complaint. The pale one discovered a knot in the plank and declared it an opponent worthy of attack. The original 4 learned generosity by example, making room without ceremony. The mother watched with a posture that said everything has a place and I will put it there. Clara shouldered her poles. "I'll sweep the bend before dusk," she said. "If tin sings, ribbon on the." She touched the mother's shoulder with respect and Nathan's sleeve with the same small salute. The door shut, the latch making that exact sound houses make when they choose to hold. Nathan set another split on coals and watched the flame take without smoke. He rotated the crate a fraction to block the last sly draft. Ritual teaches bodies what to expect. Expectation becomes peace. He set the collar near the crate so the brass could catch a stripe of sun. The smallest lifted a head, sniffed, and set a paw on the circle as if claiming a seat in a story it did not yet know. The mother breathed across metal, then looked at him again. Some decisions do not need to be hurried. He left the strap where it lay and folded the wool down so noses could taste evening. He checked the window. The ridge stood like a gray congregation. Nothing moved where nothing He let the curtain fall and listened to the room instead. Kettle hum. The soft tap of a drying mitten string. 6 heartbeats practicing unanimity. Dusk walked in without drama. He banked the fire and poured 2 lids of warm water. Feeding times fell into steps that would not demand heroics after midnight. He wiped each paw again, not because it mattered now but because ritual becomes language. Clara's poles clicked once on the ridge and faded toward the hut. Competence turned into punctuation. Nathan stretched out on the floor beside the crate, spine grateful for honest boards after days of bracing. The mother shifted until her shoulder rested lightly against his forearm. Contact offered without debt. He let the weight sit where it knew it belonged. The cabin smoke thinned into sweetness. For finished drying, frost traced lace on the window and could touch no one. Firelight moved across plank scars and filled the tiny brass letters again. He imagined the stranger reading the bend and choosing hunger over risk. Imagined tin singing if wire returned. Imagined the hut's open door waiting like a patient friend. He returned attention to what he could hold. Wool warm under his hand. The mother's steady exhale. 6 silhouettes nested into something that looked less like survival and more like living. He woke at first light to a chorus of small impatient sounds. Paws drummed. Tails attempted confidence and courage arrived ahead of coordination. He laughed once under his breath and set breakfast with a quartermaster's eye for growth. Clara knocked as the kettle sighed and stepped in on a pine-scented draught. Her look went first to the window, then to the crate, then to the mother's face. "Quiet night," she said. Tracks near the cut turned downhill. "He doesn't like singing tin." She unpacked a jar of rendered fat and cut it with honey. "Energy," she added. "Practical as always." They ate bread by the stove, listening to the soft drum of new muscle learning itself. The mother blinked more slowly when Nathan passed. Amber had warmed without losing its line. She crossed to the chair where the collar waited, set her nose on brass and held a stillness that read like a scent. Nathan lifted the strap and let it hang across his palm a heartbeat longer, memory settling into readiness. Not today, he decided. But soon, when the room announced the moment rather than grief. He cleaned spoons, stacked bowls and wrote a single line in the notebook. "Peace holds, trust deepens." He did not underline it. Proof frisked at his boots and chewed the world into manageable pieces. The ridge stayed honest. The mother laid her head against his sleeve with the weight of a vow that did not require words. The cabin had become a sanctuary, spruce smoke and thawed fur, bread and broth, the quiet industry of people and animals learning how to share a watch. Warmth lived here now, cautious and real, and each small breath inside those walls widened the future by immeasurable. Morning returned with steadiness that felt earned. Snow glazed the pines and the creek spoke in a low voice. Nathan fed the stove, lifted the wool blanket, and found 6 lively shapes sprawled in warm order. The soot-backed orphan chewed a cuff, the pale newcomer chased a sunfleck, the German shepherd mother rose, shook frost and stood before him with calm intent. He opened a tin and lifted a leather collar with a dull brass tag stamped Kyoto, a name from work where obedience found danger before boots did. He let memory pass, then knelt so his hands matched the mother's gaze. "This is a promise," he said. Amber eyes checked tone, scent and purpose. She tapped the tag, pressed her chest into his palm and held. He slipped the strap around her neck and tested the fit. "Faith," he said, the new name answering the old instead of erasing it. She lifted her head as if accepting rank. The room exhaled. Clara knocked and stepped through pine cold, scanned the ridge, and smiled at the collar's quiet authority. "Looks right," she said, sealing the door. She set a satchel on the table. Salt, sewing kit, salve, bell, hinges, latch. "If you're keeping company, make the place answer like a home." They ate bread while steam braided above the kettle. The pups wobbled in small circles, tails solving jokes their bodies barely understood. Faith prevented disaster with a shoulder and never stole initiative. Nathan drew 2 columns in his notebook. Under needs, he wrote grain, soap, tincture, thread, pads, and bowls. Under plans, he wrote fence repair, gate hinge, latch swap, draft seal and a daily schedule. The cabin rearranged around permanence. Nathan stretched a line for drying cloths, cut a cedar plank for a feeding shelf, and planed splinters away. He built a low ramp, so clumsy explorers could learn confidence without bruises. Faith audited each adjustment with patient competence. When the pale pup tripped, she steadied the learner and met Nathan's eye as if to say, "This is how you pass strength along." Clara sealed the window with wax. "Town has nails," she said. "I'll trade preserves and bring them tomorrow. The clinic keeps blank tags. The ranger will sign." She hung a small bell near the ramp. "Reward curiosity. Not sugar first, praise warmth, timing." Sun widened until the floor shone. Nathan stepped outside to read the slope. Leadville stood blade bright, enamel sky, scoured peaks, a valley proud after its beating. He shoveled a path, stacked splits, and listened to the creek whisper under glass. Saying yes had settled into his bones. Inside, the kettle whispered. The pups yawned in a chorus that made the room grin. Nathan hung the bell low. Flint rang it first, startled by success. Faith approved with a chuff. Scout followed. Lark, moss, buck and juniper learned by watching. Names became tools, not decoration, paired with calm gestures until attention clicked into place. The afternoon carried the soft noise of work. Nathan fitted the new latch and listened to the door's confident click. He hung a narrow gate to separate sleep from chaos when chores demanded focus. He sanded the threshold until paws no longer slipped. Faith sprawled by the stove in a posture mixing rest and readiness. Clara drafted a schedule. Morning feed, noon nap, dusk, ritual, nightly sweep. They ate stew in companionable quiet. The pups collapsed in a tumble that looked like a map of future trails. Nathan leaned against the cot and felt a humane fatigue that came from building something worthy of being tired for. He turned the tag until the chill left, then let Faith's chin settle on his knee. Brass touched his wrist like a signature. Evening cleared as if the valley wanted to show its bone. The ridge burned rose, cooled to lavender, and folded into deep blue. Steam lifted from the creek like horse breath. Nathan set a bowl on the post and wrote a sentence. "Keep them warm, keep them fed, keep them safe," then tucked it under the rim as a vac. He stepped outside with Faith and watched stars hammer into the high cold. Clara paused before leaving. "If you hear tin or see light where dark should be, send a flare," she said. "Tomorrow I'll take your list to town." She squeezed his shoulder, touched Faith's tag, and let the door close with its new click. The cabin seemed proud of the sound. Night settled clean. The stove ticked a satisfied rhythm. Nathan banked coals, draped the wool, and sat with a silence that felt like belonging. He thought of the first knock, the 2 rabbits, the orphans, the lean man's promise to return, and the way resolve had learned mercy's cadence. The old name had not vanished, it had agreed to carry forward, soldered to a present where duty looks like care. He wrote, "Faith wears the collar, the pups have names, Clara stands with us, the door speaks like a home." 6 sleepers dreamed different futures on the same floor. The creek told the valley that winter could be stern without being cruel forever. A shepherd breathed beside him, trusting him enough to deliver her family to his care. Toward midnight the room held a fragrance worth saving: spruce smoke, thawing fur, leather, clean iron, rabbit, bread, wax. He slept easily watching. At first light he would fetch grain, fix the south rail and begin the work of turning shelter into school. For now the vow hummed at the edge of sleep. Morning again, a pale wash through spruce. Faith rose and sat by the door with a posture that said guardian and part. Nathan opened, read the ridge and found it honest. Leadville stood stark and beautiful, every line sharpened by cold. He let the view steady him, then called the names that belonged here. 6 heads lifted, 6 bodies tumbled forward, and Faith took her place between joy and risk, like a seasoned lieutenant. He laughed once, the small sound you hear in good barns and clean kitchens. He set bowls on the shelf, checked water, and watched the bell ring again. This time not from surprise but from choice. The cabin, which had kept him alive by being spare, had become a home by learning to hold. Think of a moment you chose to build a home for someone. How did it change you? Clara returned before noon with nails and advice. She measured the south rail, set wedges, and left a note for the ranger about the man who had promised to come back. "We will not be surprised," she said. "We will be ready and kind." Faith leaned into Nathan's leg as if underlining it. They ended the day with a simple ritual: gear checked, door tested, list updated, water set by the stove for the night. Nathan touched the tag, spoke the names, and thanked the weather for its severe honesty. Outside peaks wore evening like a blessing. Inside warmth lived without apology. The storm had done its worst. What remained was faith and belonging. A family chosen when a knock asked for shelter and a man answered like a home. Dawn lifted a pale seam over the ridge, and the cabin breathed like a living thing, fire ticking, kettle whispering, paws scrawling quick commas across the boards, while soft breath turned the air visible and kind. Nathan stood by the door with Faith leaning against his leg, brass tag cool against his wrist, and felt the truth he had been avoiding. Rescue had moved in both directions. He had unbarred a threshold for a desperate mother and 6 trembling lives. Yet those lives had unbarred something inside him that months of silence could not touch. The room that once said survive now said belong. Firelight set copper ovals on pine scars. Steam braided the window. The bell chimed when curious noses found it. Flint jolted, then rang it again because wonder likes proof. Lark watched, mesmerized by cause and effect, and tried next. Moss settled near the ramp like a sentry pretending not to grin. Buck tested the feeding shelf with theatrical caution, and satisfied by its honesty drank without splashing. Juniper introduced herself to a dust swirl and chased it into a sunstripe. Scout, the pebble who had fought past frost, tucked a paw on Nathan's boot, as if notarizing a promise. Faith rose and crossed the floor with that unteachable balance of courage and restraint that soldiers and good mothers share, ribs toward heat, eyes toward risk, patience ready to become teeth if need returned. Nathan breathed a thank you he did not voice. He had walked through nights when wind hammered rafters and memory knocked harder. He had held the line because training said hold. He had opened the door because conscience said open. Now the same hands ladled water, trimmed wicks, reset latches, and wrote small schedules that turned rescue into stewardship. Outside the peaks wore white crowns. The creek whispered persistence under glass, and aspens stood like slim prayers along the draw. He understood that grace rarely shouts. Often it taps a door with careful claws and waits for permission to trust. God's quiet miracles looked like that here, a sentry mother offering everything she had, a widow with honey and field tricks, a room learning how to keep watch without hardening, a man relearning tenderness that will fight if required. He lifted the wool edge and watched 6 stomachs rise and fall in a cadence that sounded like a well-run barracks at lights out, peaceful because structure carried weight. He pressed his forehead to Faith's brow, and for that small sacrament let stillness speak. Thank you, he said without sound. To the one who breathes stars and still steers caravans of the small and nearly lost toward thresholds where light holds steady. Thank you to the handlers and dogs who taught loyalty with their whole body. Thank you to neighbors who fix with competence instead of noise. Thank you for a valley that tells the truth with weather and by telling it makes courage honest. He opened the door and read the day. Leadville stood blade bright and clean, the path he had cut yesterday. The south rail waited for wedges. The hut above the bend wore a friendly tilt he had come to trust. He shoveled a little, stacked a little, and found that purpose sat inside his bones like heat. Saying yes was no longer a single act. It had become a rhythm. He went back in and watched the bell answer a nose with a soft ring that sounded like agreement. Fire painted the planks again. Steam drew. The room smelled of spruce, thawed fur, leather, clean iron, rabbit and bread. A fragrance that carried memory forward without letting it drown the present. Clara arrived with nails, salve and jokes about mud that would become legend by spring. She measured the threshold, reset the latch, stitched a small pad, praised a patient pause and taught Flint to wait while a bowl landed. Faith approved with a quiet chuff. Nathan wrote in his notebook and shut it because the lesson did not need ink to remain. He poured clean water, set fresh food and watched manners grow along with muscle. He understood that he had been rescued into work, not ease, into joy that would demand vigilance, into a belonging that would occasionally ache and still be worth every ache. A thought rose and asked to be spoken aloud, not to the room but to whoever waited somewhere with a lamp and a doubt. He turned toward the door, found an even voice, and let gratitude shape the line. The story had given him bread and light. He wanted to pass both along, because strength multiplies when shared and hope matures when named. If this story moved you, share it with a friend. Comment amen if you believe hope shines in the darkest storm. Subscribe to join our family of faith and courage. He breathed once, then added softer, for anyone carrying a private winter, for anyone waiting beside an empty hinge, for anyone convinced no one will knock. Tell us how mercy found you. Tell us about the evening you chose to become shelter. Write the names of your miracles so we can honor them together and keep watch for new ones. Stories braid strength when they travel. Testimony turns cold into fuel. He sat by the crate and listened to the room settle. Paws thumped once, then went limp. Faith rested her jaw on his knee and surveyed the door with unspectacular devotion. He remembered counting breaths, under fire, holding a collar that meant partnership, seeing endurance change into tenderness without losing it. He knew he was not finished healing, he had simply found a place where healing could work. God had used dogs, a widow, a storm, a near enemy, and a stubborn valley to do what sermons alone could not teach: his hands to welcome and his watch to sing. Evening would come, spring would follow. The lean man might return, or might not. They would be ready, not angry, not naive. Steady. He would train with kindness. Clara would bring nails, thread and town news. Faith would keep the doorway between joy and risk. The pups would turn chaos into stories. The creek would run clearer. The door would keep saying welcome. He would keep answering, and when the wind rose again, the bell would ring, and the room would remember how to stand together. He rose, opened the door, and let morning complete the benediction it had begun. Light stepped in, cold stepped back. Faith nudged his knee and walked out. 6 small bodies tumbled after her, clumsy, unstoppable, a chorus of cheerful certainty. Nathan set bowls, checked water, touched the tag as if signing a pledge, and heard the latch answer with the honest click he loved. He whispered thank you again to the giver of every good gift, and felt the cabin agree. The storm had done its worst. What remained? Trust, work, family, faith would keep shining long after the snow forgot its own voice.